In this episode of PsiloHealth Integrations, we spoke with Ashley Latecki-Ellenboss, the owner of Skyhouse Herbal School and Apothecary, and Dr. Kevin Tidgewell, a medicinal and natural products chemist. During our discussion, we touched on everything from how natural medicines interact with the body, the entourage effect of full-spectrum medicines, molecules and plant spirits, and why dosages matter and vary across the diverse spectrum of human bodies. On a personal level, this is one of the most informative and eye-opening talks that we've hosted, and I'm certain that it will have a profound impact on your views of the healing power of nature.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be waiting a little bit till we have people streaming in. But while we do that, feel free, audience, to introduce yourself in the chat. Say your name, where you're from, any questions you have today. We're excited to be hosting you all. Today, we're in for a treat. We have Ashley and Dr. Kevin Tidgewell speaking with us today to talk about their work, their practices, what they have going on in the fields of herbal medicine and synthetic and natural products chemistry. So as some quick introductions for Ashley Latecki-Ellenboss. Is that right? Was that good?
Oh, you got it.
Perfect. Awesome. So Ashley earned her master's of science in clinical herbal medicine from Maryland University of Integrative Health. She is a professional member, registered herbalist, and board member of the American Herbalist Guild. She is now the owner of Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary, where she leads online training programs and offers herbal consultations. We're going to go ahead and put a link to her domain here shortly, so feel free to learn more of her work over there. Dr. Kevin Tidgewell, he earned his PhD in medicinal and natural products chemistry doing research on the plant hallucinogen salvinorin A. We're definitely going to be asking about how that went. He's worked at Scripps Institute of Oceanography at UC San Diego and the Smithsonian Tropical Institute in Panama. He was working on marine natural products for cancer and neglected tropical diseases. He is a professor at Duquesne University. He's actually my biochemistry professor in my pharmacy school program. And his lab does research on discovering natural products from marine cyanobacteria to be used to treat pain, anxiety, depression, parasitic infections, and cancer. So today's event was titled purposely to be herbal and synthetic medicines, not herbal versus synthetic or natural versus synthetic. The reason here is that, with this emerging field of psychedelic and entheogenic medicine, we do have the opportunity to completely reframe mental health with these psychedelic therapeutics, and all options need to be on the table, right? We're already sensing some division between the natural, the herbal approach versus the synthetic, or the R&D, clinical trial, CGMP approach to healing. It really needs to be all options. So that's why we're here today. And with that, I know I gave some introductions, but I'd love for Ashley to go ahead and introduce herself and talk about why she's doing what she's doing and where she comes from.
All right. Well, thank you, Saeed, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm just grateful to be here because I agree this is such an important conversation to have because there's more in common, I think, between the natural world and what it offers us and what we humans are creating as synthetic. I mean, we are organic, we're natural. Humans are natural. So whatever we create is also natural. And we get a lot of those ideas from nature. So I think I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. For me, it was my own health that brought me into herbal medicine. I had asthma. I was allergic to like every single thing you could think of. I had one of those skin patch tests and the doctor was like, whoa, you're allergic to like everything. So my mom, was looking for some different alternatives because they wanted to put me in a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins because I had, everything was just getting worse. And so she pulled me out of Johns Hopkins and brought me to a naturopath who used acupressure, herbal medicine, and homeopathy. And in 6 months, my asthma was gone. Most of my allergies were gone. And I felt like a veil had been lifted. It was like my psyche, I think I had food allergies that were undiagnosed. And so I think that experience at the age of 13 really opened up my mind. And, I was like, oh yeah, there's some invisible stuff going on here. There's, homeopathy, for example, it takes a little bit of stretching of our mind to understand it. So I knew that I wanted to go into natural medicine for most of my life, or at least, help people the way I was helped. And, I had probably like most people, a little bit of a winding path. I went through environmental science, wove back to natural health sciences, and really settled in herbal medicine, and began studying herbs about 23 years ago. I can't even believe that, but I took my first herb walks and herb classes in the mountains of North Carolina, and just was completely in awe of what nature was creating. And I decided to get my master's of science in clinical herbal medicine, as you mentioned. And so since that time, I also ran a yoga studio for 20 years, taught for 20 years, ran it for 10 years. So I was always weaving in kind of mind-body practices and herbs. And then we closed our yoga studio just a year and a half ago. And now I'm just focusing solely on herbs and herbal medicines, and really working with helping people to find a relationship with plant medicines and helping connect them to nature as one of the ways that they can heal themselves. So not even like it's just the plant compound, but it's the way the plant connects us back to nature that's part of the healing experience. So I run a year-long, year 1 and year 2 herbal apprenticeships, and see clients throughout the week. I have 2 small little girls who run around screaming all day, who I just love. And that's kind of my life and what brought me here.
Awesome. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I sense like the passion and on your journey. And thank you for sharing your time tonight. And I'm hopeful that our community here is going to learn quite a bit from the conversation today. I think it's excellent that you're able to find healing with your allergies and your asthma. I suffer from some mild asthma. So, when the seasons change or it's tough. Additionally, I'm allergic to dogs and cats. My roommate has a dog. My girlfriend has a cat. Can't escape it. So I'm just infested with allergens. So maybe I'll have to reach out to you about some advice for that. But thank you, Ashley, again. Dr. Kevin Tidgwell, please.
So, I think I was always just kind of interested in science and exploring, right? As a little kid running around, grabbing everything and putting it underneath a microscope, from, blades of grass to pieces of skin to, scabs or whatever, right? Like just trying to figure out how things work, take things apart, what makes them do what they do, and can you put them back together? And then in college, I actually was starting to look at, it's called computational chemistry, because it was sort of sold to me as, we're going to be able to do all these really interesting experiments and these things that are too dangerous or too expensive, but we can do it computationally. And then I spent a summer actually doing the research, and I was like, oh man, like I'm just sitting in a windowless office submitting jobs to a supercomputer. Like this is not for me, And so I ended up, kind of applying to grad schools pretty broadly. But I settled on medicinal and natural products chemistry because my PhD advisor, his sort of advice and discussion about it is, medicinal chemistry is organic chemistry with a purpose, right? We're not just trying to make a pretty molecule. We're trying to make a molecule that does something. And then the natural products aspect is so important because, a lot of sort of my philosophy on drug discovery is that, nature has the answers. Right, the leads are out there, the compounds are out there. Nature doesn't waste energy making inactive molecules, And what our job is, or what my job is as a natural products chemist, is to figure out, okay, what does nature make, and can we use it for our own purposes, right? So obviously, there's ecological aspects and ecological reasons that why does nature make it? Why does the plant need the compound? Why does the bacteria? Why do they need the compound? Is it signaling? Is it attracting a mate? Is it attracting a helper? Is it repelling something that's hurting it? But then, because we're so interconnected, right? Our receptors are so similar. We see plants that make serotonin. We see, plants that make these compounds which activate and turn on our receptors. And so how can we utilize, nature, who's the ultimate chemist, for sort of our own understanding and our own kind of betterment of discovery. And so in grad school, I worked on hallucinogens, and specifically with salvinorin A, it's a really interesting hallucinogen because it's an opiate. And so my projects were really involved in trying to turn it into a pain reliever. And so we actually flipped it from sort of, one opiate receptor to another. And it became this really, really interesting analgesic that acted completely different from opiates, didn't really cause as much addiction, and it had sort of different tolerances. And then I started to move into, for my postdoc, and now my lab works in the ocean more. So we focus on bacteria, mostly because bacteria are just these prolific producers of chemistry. They've evolved to, make these really complex reactions, really specific, really tailored to do exactly what they want to do. And so it's sort of interesting that, we can utilize them to better understand and to better make and create these molecules. And then we also have some collaborations. So I have one collaborator, Dr. Telesfor Ngolofak, at a university in Cameroon. And what he does is he actually goes out into Cameroon and interviews medicine men and shamans and local healers and says, okay, if you have someone in your village who has arthritis or has inflammation or chronic pain, what would you give them? And then they go and they collect those plants from that region where that healer actually is. They make the extracts, they test them in the lab to say, okay, are these functional? Are these working? And then they go back and let them know, hey, this plant is great, but maybe stop using this one for hypertension. It's actually going to raise blood pressure, not lower it. And so he's actually, doing that interconnection of using sort of modern techniques and science in order to help spread and increase the availability of the more kind of natural medicines.
Wow. That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to dig deeper more into what you did from taking the salvinorin, the salvia plant itself, how you studied it for its analgesic properties. I think that'd be really awesome to talk about. Would you want to share with us what that process looks like? Because I don't think we're familiar with that.
Yeah, well, and the process, Ashley is probably really familiar with this process because I think that, her work and what she does is actually really similar to a natural products chemist. I always tell undergraduates or new students in my lab that if you can make coffee or you can make tea, you're a natural products chemist, right? Like you're making an extract. You are taking the plant material, you're extracting out the active ingredients, you're combining them, adding other things, right? You're going to add some heat, add some sugar, add some cream, right? You're going to make it so that it's all the things that you want. And so essentially what we would do with salvinorin A, so at the time it was still legal. We would order it off the internet. We'd call up head shops and say, hey, how many kilos of leaves do you have? They would usually hang up the phone or they would, patch us through to the boss. I think one time we got 50 kilos of leaves. And we would essentially, go to Walmart or Target and buy a blender and grind the leaves up into a powder and then make, sort of about a 3-foot tall glass column, fill it with leaves, extract out all the chemicals. And then we use different sort of chromatography and methods to purify the compounds inside. With salvinorin A, we were able to do some really cool things and just crystallize the active compound, the hallucinogen, immediately from extracts. And then we did what's called semi-synthesis. So, when you think of synthesis or synthetic molecules, we could do a total synthesis. So starting from really small basic pieces and then building the entire molecule. Or you can do semi-synthesis, where you're going to take a related molecule or a pretty much finished molecule and then alter that. And so salvinorin A has this one functional group. It's an acetate. And at that point, there wasn't a lot known about which parts of the molecule were required for hallucinations, which were required for kappa binding. And so we had chemically removed that acetate and then added different functional groups back onto it, and then tested it against the 3 opioid receptors. And we ended up making this molecule. We called it Hercanorin, after the mascot of the University of Iowa. And it ended up being a mu opioid agonist. So then we tested it in animals, and it was really good at taking away pain. We were able to actually make animals who were addicted to fentanyl or morphine, so that fentanyl or morphine no longer works. Hercanorin would still take away pain in those animals. So there's something going on with the way that it activates the receptor. It's called biased agonism. So generally, when you activate a receptor, we kind of think about activating a receptor, turning a receptor on as just like an on-off thing. But really, the receptors in our cells and in our neurons are much more like fine-tuned. There's lots of possible pathways that we can activate and turn on, and so different structures will interact differently and turn on these different sort of downstream signalers. And based on those interactions, you can get different physiological effects. So small modifications can have large impacts on the activity. Interesting.
So Ashley, when it comes to like the way you develop your unique preparations and tailor them to your clients, did any of that resonate with you? I'm curious as to how, like, what your thoughts are on Dr. Kevin Tidgewell's approach to natural product chemistry and isolating these compounds, to how you do it in your practice with your herbs. You're muted right now, just so you know.
Thank you. Yeah, I think like Dr. Tidgewell said, there's more in common. And yeah, I mean, where I learned a lot of my herbal extraction was from traditional knowledge. I mean, humans have been extracting the chemical compounds from plants for thousands of years. And so, there's some really tried and true methods using water and alcohol as solvents. And that's, kind of mostly what I use to make tinctures. And I teach my students how to do that because it's pretty simple. You do have to know some chemistry though. You have to know which compounds you're extracting, and are they water or are they fat soluble? And that will influence the ratio of water to alcohol you use. And, in my practice, I'm usually trying to get the most full spectrum of the plant that I can. So, if like, let's say the plant has a little bit more resins in it, which are fat soluble, I'll maybe use a little bit more alcohol to draw those out. But I still want to make sure I have enough water to pull out those tannins and the other water soluble compounds. So it's always kind of just, knowing the chemistry is so important though, because you have to know what you're extracting and what's the best way to do that. And then you have just water extractions, which is just a basic tea. And that works really well too for most plants. So yeah. And one thing in my practice that I was really interested in when I was studying herbs, and actually this was my senior thesis project when I was at the University of Maryland, which was standardized extracts versus whole herb extracts. So, because in the herbal world, there are, you go to the natural food store and on the shelf, you'll see, just, nettle leaf, right? And then you'll see nettle leaf standardized to, 0.7% of these particular compounds. And so I was like, well, what is the difference here? And why do we do that? And so, I think that's something where it gets a little bit more complicated, which is when is it really helpful to isolate particular compounds? And when is the whole plant and actually a better medicine? So that's something, again, that I think herbalists across the country, I mean, it's funny because one thing, there's in a book, a classic herb book called Medical Herbalism by David Hoffman. He says, like, the number one thing that all herbalists will probably, there's a contention among herbalists is like, number one is dosing. You get so many different answers. And number two is extraction, and how do you get the best thing out of the plant? And again, that just depends. It depends what kind of herbalist you are and what you're interested in. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to come back to dosing here in a second, but you mentioned full spectrum, right? And in the United States, with our medicalized model, especially if you go through the FDA, It's all about like, let's find, the one molecule that is going to work, and let's extract everything out, and let's standardize it so that we know 25 grams equals 25 grams, or whatever the measurement is. So my question to both of you is, how important is the entourage effect and having a full spectrum? And, are there any negative connotations with an entourage effect, like maybe some compounds in there that we don't necessarily want? And how do you navigate around that?
Ashley, you want to start, or you want me to start?
Why don't you start us off?
Okay. So for me, I think it's something that we have to study. It's not something that you can say all plants or all disease states or all compounds are going to benefit or be harmed by being pure or being a whole extract or being an alcohol tincture or being, a lotion. Right. I think that these are the things that we have to actually study. We have to look for synergistic effects. We have to say, okay, is there some small minor compound which is going to make the major compound more effective? So in medicinal chemistry, we'd call that a positive allosteric modulator, right? So a positive allosteric modulator can bind sort of near the site of the actual receptor and make that receptor bind tighter, either to like our normal, neuronal signaling molecules, right? So it could increase our dopamine or increase our serotonin without actually activating it itself. Or it could be, just amplifying the effect of some other molecule that's present in that extract. But we could also see antergy, right? So we could see what we would call a negative allosteric modulator. So something that would bind and make it harder for the normal compound or ligand to bind, and that's going to reduce any effects. And then obviously one of the biggest issues that I can kind of see is that, possible adulteration of compounds, or also even like, minor impurities of something super, super toxic, right? So if you think of like aflatoxins, or, if we think of, toxins which are produced by bacteria or fungi, which maybe would get on like a wheat product, that we're going to have to make sure isn't in bread or beer or any of these other kind of yeast produced, products. Those sort of minor impurities could, have huge implications. And so those minor toxic compounds could be a really big issue. And that's where I think you're going to have some trouble sort of with widespread adoption of kind of herbal medicines and kind of extracts.
Yeah. And, the thing that's really interesting too is that we still don't know a lot about plants. I mean, for example, ginger has 744 known active compounds.
Yeah.
So these are things that we know of, that we know are active, but how many have we not found yet? And, we know ginger, it's such a classic medicine. Has so many antiviral, antibacterial, diaphoretic. It's got so many incredible properties. And it's all of those compounds, plus the ones we haven't figured out yet, that are probably making it a whole medicine. To Dr. Tidgwell's point, though, that there are things like in a lot of our, not a lot, but some of our herbs that we use, like comfrey and coltsfoot, we have these pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which can have toxic effects on the liver. And so, they are now breeding comfrey to have less of those. So in that case, it's like, well, this is actually a smart advancement. If we can, start to breed a plant so it has less of these harmful compounds. But, the problem with standardization, at least from me as an herbalist and somebody who sits and speaks on behalf of clinical herbalists, is that when we get so stuck on the compounds and standardizing, it really limits a few things. First of all, it doesn't talk at all about the quality of the plant material when you first start. And you've probably seen this, Kevin, where, if you have bad starting material, like there's really nothing you can do to get that high spectrum chromatography outline that you want to see. It's just going to be, it's going to be like a dead matter. But if you have really high quality plant material, probably you're going to hit all those markers for those compounds you're looking for. And so, I think one thing that, it's just a problem because if we're only, if we're testing just for a bunch of different things, that's good. But if we're really only focusing on one thing, then there might be other things in the plant that are actually offsetting or somehow, buffering some of the stronger negative effects of those compounds that we might not understand or even know about. And I think, yeah, I think like, if you look at St. John's wort, which the, standardized compound is hypericin, that's what we often see. And hypericin has been studied very, very well. We know that it has a really, it has an effect on SSRI. So it basically slows the reuptake of serotonin in the body, just like a lot of our antidepressant drugs do. But that's not it. That's not the only thing it does. St. John's wort was classically used as a nervine. It was used for anxiety. It was used to build up the nervous system. And it was even used as a solar plexus medicine to help people get their willpower back and to feel like strong and in their center. And so is that why it works? Does it work because of that hypericin, or because it as a plant, when you look at the St. John's wort flower, it looks like little nerve endings. These little tufts look like little nerve endings, and it's yellow like the solar plexus chakra. So, it's hard to know, we can't definitely say what it is, but I agree that when we know, the more we know, the safer things can be, and the more we can at least kind of understand how things work. But for me as an herbalist, I'm just like, don't rule out the magic. Because that's a big part of how I have seen them work in my years of practice and as a teacher.
Yeah, I will, and I mean, right? Like the mind is a powerful, powerful organ, right? There's so much to be said for, that combination of an active molecule plus the belief, and it's not a pure placebo or not a pure nocebo effect, right? That there is some amount of that you can sort of help your own body's chemistry to then improve on the activity of the molecules that are going to be present in the plants.
Yeah. There's a bunch of I don't know if you've seen the work by Ted Kapchuk at Harvard Medical University School, and his whole, like, all he does is research on the placebo effect.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to try to figure it out. And so what he did is he took a trial. He had I think it was 80 participants, and they all had IBS, classically diagnosed IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome. And instead of the normal double-blind placebo-controlled studies, he actually told them, this is a sugar pill. This is an inert compound. So take it for 3 weeks and then come back and let's take the scores again. And the crazy thing is that 85% of those people had reduced symptoms. So it's like, what is that? It's not just the placebo, but I think it's also like there's a quality of faith that when we take something in and we are looking for help and support, that like you said, our mind gets on board. And our mind starts to do the inner work too, to realign things and start to heal our body. So I know that's not plant chemistry, but I just found that, I was like, whoa, that's pretty amazing. So does dose matter then? Or is it the consciousness in which we deliver the herb, right?
Well, as a pharmacist, I would just have to say that dose definitely matters too. I agree. I think that is so important to have the right intentions as to why we intake whatever we're putting in our body. Just for everyone, I put a little link to that Harvard some information about that Harvard study regarding the power of the placebo effect in the chat. Feel free to check that out. Thank you, Ashley, for bringing that up. And while we're on the subject of dosing, I would love to just ask, how, when it comes to, especially in the world of herbal medicine, how do you reliably predict dosing in your clients? Because I imagine that, doing some digging into, the herbal approach, natural medicine approach versus the synthetic, one of the biggest connotations about the medicine for the herbal world is this lack of predictable dosing. How have you overcome that in your practice?
Yeah, if you would have asked me this like, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I might have had a different answer. But now that I've had, many years of experience kind of seeing the plants work, it is unreliable. It just is. There's no perfect dose. And the reason for that is because people are all very different. And so, what I think makes herbal medicine very unique is that we have an energetic understanding of people. We look at using the ancient Galenic system from the Greek medicine, hot, cold, damp, or dry. Is this client, like what are their energy, what is their background kind of temperature and moisture levels? And then that will help me not only to choose the right herb, but to maybe predict how things are going to go forward. So, if I have like sort of a football player type who's like, and again, it gets even wooer because like, astrology, like let's say I've got a big Taurus, he's like a bull, right? And he's like very slow to change his mind, doesn't want to change his diet. I'm going to have to give him a higher dose of the plant and maybe use stronger herbs to achieve an effect, where I could have someone who is like a kapha, or I could just say like a very mellow, very laid back, weighs the same amount. So we're not talking about weight here, but his temperament is very wet and damp. And that person, I might have to use something a different dosage. The other person is going to metabolize things a little faster. The other one's going to metabolize things slower, just based on their constitution and body type. And then, if I have a very hot, dry person, or a thin person who, again, all of that's going to help me weigh in on my dosing.
Yeah.
But there are, standard dosing practices. So there are textbooks that are out there that I think, there's the British Herbal Pharmacopoeia, even the SCOP monograph. So there are like, standard texts that we can use to assess standard dosage. But in my practice, what I'm really trying to figure out is like, okay, do I have the right understanding of this person? Does this plant fit in both on a chemical level with what I want to try to do, but also on an energetic level of it's going to balance their constitutional weaknesses, and then a dose that's not going to hit them over the head. And oftentimes I start with a kind of a moderate to low dose, and then I'll increase it over time just to make sure that number one, I'm not wasting herbs, and number two, that they don't have a strong effect that's going to turn them away from the plants, so that can also be a really nice approach that a lot of herbalists will use.
Totally. No, I think that's awesome. And like, I mean, when it comes to even the world of pharmacy, start low and go slow is, a mantra in practice. Additionally, I really appreciate your inclusion of Ayurvedic medicine in your practice. Is that unique to your practice, or is it your practice style, or do other herbalists also, is that also a lot of overlap between Ayurveda?
Yeah, honestly, the energetic systems it's actually kind of a requirement. If you want to become a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild, you need to have over 4,000 hours of clinical practice, and you have to have an energetic system. It could be Ayurveda, it could be Chinese medicine, or it could be classic Greek energetics, which is like the humoral types. But you have to have that in order to practice herbs at a very high level, because we've got so much history in all of those traditions so that we can really understand how the herbs work in different body types.
I think that's so awesome. I mean, I didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that. Do you ever imagine I guess some of the potential innovative trends in like nutrigenomics or the microbiome or microbiota sampling to have an impact on, personalizing dosing and approaches to treating these different symptoms and ailments in your practice or any practice of herbalism?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they could have a really wonderful and beneficial effect, because the more we know about the body, it's kind of like, you have two libraries. It's like I've got my plant library where it's like I go through my Rolodex of all the things I know about the plants, right? Their chemistry, their, all of the different pieces. And then I've got my physiology Rolodex. And so I'm kind of like constantly, when I'm working with a client, I'm trying to access as much as I can from both. And so the more that, we could know about what an individual's body is doing, the easier it would be to match the correct herbs. Because, like, for example, like let's just use allergies, since both you, Saeed, and I have history of allergies. But see, your allergies might be very different from mine because we're constitutionally different. However, if you look at a list of herbs for allergies, it kind of just looks like, well, there's all these herbs. But an herbalist would look at you and I and figure out what's different and then find the specific, maybe one or two of that list of 50. That would be very, very, that would be a specific match for what it is we need.
Yeah, interesting. Have you ever heard of the, it's called agape? Or agape? It's usually utilized prior to like bufo ceremonies. Is that something you're familiar with? It's like it's like a blend of different herbs and spices, and there's a bunch of different types. And usually in shamanic practices that facilitate these experiences, they go ahead and read the energy of their client, of their navigator, and they choose a unique blend to match, like, I think, the vibrational energy of the user. So I wasn't sure if you had any insight on that. I don't know much about the subject, but that came to mind as you were talking. So, but yeah, cool.
And
so
I mean,
something that I really
go for it, Scott. Go for it.
No, what I was going to say is actually something I really appreciate about what you just said is, you know, I'm probably about as far away from woo as possible. I like to be very scientific about things. So when we start talking about dosage, like, I always like to know what my dosage is, because I feel that there's a very scientific course of action that you go through to determine that. And, you know, most of my experiences, especially with plant medicines, you know, you get a shaman, he kind of pours a cup and he's like, yeah, that'll work, you know. And so it all seems very, you know, not really measured. But what you just described for me is a very scientific process that you utilize so that you can find a specific dosage and specific medicine for a person. And I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciated that explanation, because to me that gives me so much more belief in, you know, in systems that come from traditional medicine, right? These things that have built over thousands of years. And it just made me realize that, you know, what have these people been doing for thousands of years, but, you know, a scientific process of figuring out how to use these herbal medicines. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I'll give it back to Kenneth.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that personalization, right, is something that more of the Western medical system could really try to utilize. You know, as we get better in genomic techniques and understanding what each individual's genome is and how their microbiome interacts with these molecules that we're using, we can understand a little bit better of personalization of doses. You know, and instead of saying, oh yeah, you know, we're going to base the standard dose off of a 180-pound white male, like, that's ridiculous. You know, that's not the average human. That's not what's going on. And, you know, I think it's always interesting that that personalized nature and thinking more about individualized dosage, as opposed to, oh, well, I know that pill comes in, 10 mg increments, so you're going to get 30 mgs, versus saying, like, oh, you know, like, this person is experienced, this person has used this before, they might have an additional tolerance. Or, as Ashley, you know, as you were saying, that, you know, you sort of start at that middle level and then are going to allow their body to kind of warm up, and that part of what that could be is an upregulation of receptors, right? Or sort of turning on the body's machinery. And so, you know, that individualization, that personalization is so important for, you know, actually treating a whole person and not just treating a disease, right? That, you know, when you go in to talk to a doctor, you don't want, okay, great, like, I understand that if you activate this receptor, I'm supposed to feel happy, but I'm still a person, right? I'm not just a collection of receptors and cells. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that we can kind of use both, right? Like, that if we can understand and give, you know, people like Scott, you know, Scott says that, you know, he's so far from woo, like, can we, you know, sequence his genome and look at his microbiome and then match that and correlate that with these kind of essences and thoughts about, you know, more of our traditional systems, that we can sort of, to give you that, you know, that little bit more of proof. And obviously, you know, I did, and somebody said in the chat, you know, that don't forget the magic. But there's a lot of things that, you know, we don't understand. So much of the brain is a black box to us. And so it's important to understand that we are incredibly complex. And so we have to sort of accept that there's going to be some gray area. There's going to be some wiggle room in there.
Yeah, I agree. And, I was thinking too, when I was listening to Scott speak, that, the shamans, I've met a few medicine people myself, and it's like they are, we think of the scientific process as being measurements of this and that and, test tubes, but the scientific process is that of observation. So they're looking at you, Scott, and they're seeing you and all of, your temperament, they're seeing things that you might not even see, right? And then that's how they're calibrating, how much of this plant or this plant and how often we're going to let you have some and, all of that. So it's still very scientific. It's just a different system. That's all. And I think that herbalists we work the same way. I mean, I have a client who comes in with a nervous temperament and they're just kind of on edge. I know that their nervous system is very sensitive. So they're going to get a low dose because you can just see it. And so they're going to get, they might even get 3 drops of something that's normally 3 milliliters. And I have clients who are like psychic intuitives, all sorts of interesting people who I can even have them hold a bottle and do my pulse reading and I can feel the plant changing their body and they're just holding it. I mean, they're not even taking it internally and they can, their physiology changes just from that suggestion and somehow getting it's different for different plants and they don't know these plants, but their body knows the plants. And that's just really interesting.
And what you just described there is how I understand the different medicine men, the shamans who facilitate agape prior to these experiences. They do those pulse readings while hovering, while clasping onto each unique blend of plant. So what you just said is exactly what I was envisioning when I was asking the original question. So,
oh, beautiful. I must have picked up on that.
Well, and there's this amazing story of so Tu Youyou is this Chinese scientist, and she won the Nobel Prize for discovering artemisinin, so anti-malarial compound from Artemisia annua, and Artemisia annua is in the Materia Medica. It's used in traditional Chinese medicine. And for a long time, people had tried to find the anti-malarial compound present, and nobody could do it. And then she, in her research on natural products, went to the actual Materia Medica, was reading the ancient texts, and saw, okay, this is how they prepared it. She followed their preparations, found artemisinin. And, so she was like, I'm not going to try to decide how I want to extract it. I'm going to use their methods and I'm going to extract it the way they said to. And then she was able to find, this amazing anti-malarial compound.
Yeah. I mean, we need that. I think our human minds, especially in the West, we do very well with, measurable outcomes and information. So it's like when she found that compound, I think for the Western mind, it really validates something. And that might also be part of, I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we have from the work that you're doing, which is just, trying to figure out how these things work. And letting our minds, it's fun. I love my work. It's so fun. And I'm guessing you do too. Because it's, as much as it is there's a lot of mental dexterity that it takes to kind of do this work. And I think we're built for that. We're built to explore and discover things. And so, even though I don't personally do that, I'm so appreciative of the people that do, because I utilize all of that, in my practice.
What are your guys' thoughts on plant consciousness? I'm curious.
I mean, I think that organisms are out there for a reason, right? There's definitely communication that is going on between plants of the same species, between plants of different species, between plants and bacteria, between plants and fungi. I think that there's this whole sense of communication that's going on that we don't see and understand. We know that if we look at flowers and things under different, of course, sort of light filters, and look at spectra of light that we can't perceive, that's how insects are being attracted to certain flowers to help pollinate and to do these things. And I think that there's this system of communication going on. Do I think that that's a consciousness? I don't know, but I think that there's this level of communication that we haven't really tapped into. And I think that, humans in general are typically pretty selfish. And so we tend to view the world from a human-centered view. But if you can sort of take yourself out of that and go from a plant-centered view or a fungal-centered view or a bacterial-centered view, that you could actually sort of envision how they perceive the world and how the world is experienced by them. Does that mean that they actually are, or just that gives me a better sense of, being compassionate and trying to protect the other inhabitants of this world? I don't know. I don't really have those answers, but I think that there's definitely communication. I don't know whether it's purposeful or what it means, but I think that there is, a clear reason for it, and that there's more out there than just cells producing for no reason.
Yeah, I agree. And the fungal network in particular, the mycorrhizal network underneath the soil, and how plants of all different species communicate through that underground network, and how they've done studies in the redwood forests where like the mother redwood will like send carbon to her babies to help them grow. So there's like, in my spiritual practice, I practice bhakti yoga, and in the ancient scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam and a lot of the older books, they talk about souls as persons. So they actually talk about plants as persons. So from the yogic perspective, this is a person in a plant body. This is a person in a spider bite plant body. I am a person in a human body. So it's the soul is the same. It's just the level of consciousness depending on what kind of body you're born into. And that's really changed the way that I see plants, because it's not like I go around and say like, oh, hi, Harry, to a tree, because their consciousness is not the same, but it's there. And I have had so many experiences in my life where, I'm going to sound like a crazy person, but in my gardens, I talk to my plants and I talk to trees. I've got favorite trees that were like, we've got a relationship that's different than I have with another tree. And the work of Monica Gagliano, do any of you know, have you heard of her? She wrote a book called Thus Bespoke the Plant. She's an Australian, she was a microbiologist, and she was actually studying an aquatic microbiologist studying on the reefs of North Queensland. And so she started having dreams where plants were talking to her, and she's like, what's going on? And she was like sober, but she kept getting all of this information. And when she would also be under the ocean for like hours and hours studying these small little creatures and getting to know them, it's just, she started having these really interesting experiences. And in her book, which is just fascinating, she started hearing these songs that the plants were singing to her. And it wasn't until she went to Peru and met a medicine man and started taking entheogens that the songs she had heard sober in Australia were the same songs the plant were singing to the shaman. So the shaman, she's like, how do you know he sings that song? Well, because that's just his song. That's his, what is it called? They each...
Icaros?
An Icaro, yeah. Icaros, or the Icaros. So yeah, each plant has its own song. And so she was hearing these Icaros, these plant songs from another country. So it's like, how are these plants not alive? And how is there communication, just like we now understand the mycorrhizal network under the ground? Like, we've got an internet, guys, and that's crazy. So what is the natural internet that's connecting us all, that some people are just much more attuned to, and others maybe not as much. It's really interesting. Her name is Monica Gagliano, and she's she has a bunch of TED Talks. I mean, she's just really wonderful. If you want to listen to her, you're welcome. So yes, I believe plants have consciousness.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that, you'll find people prior to, their psychedelic experiences being relatively agnostic or, not believing the idea of, secondary consciousness, right? Being that consciousness exists outside of human beings. But then during or after their experience, they feel as though, these plant medicine, the ayahuasca to psilocybin mushrooms, they really have a strong sense of these compounds, these plants, these organisms being full of conscious energy. So it's, I think, a really interesting intersection we find ourselves in, because trying to marry and merge the scientific approach, that we need to quantify things, but we already don't know enough about consciousness. There's a lot of amazing theories out there, thought processes. We can get into fMRI, studies, but like at the end of the day, if we can't see it, we can't quantify it. So then, therefore, some people just completely dismiss the conversation about consciousness and plants. So it's just it's a really interesting area I think we find ourselves in, and it's cool to see you both putting it together a little bit. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you can throw me in there too. I mean, I'm one of those people that I did not believe. I was total humanist. I believe that there was some sort of consciousness within animals. And I believe in plant consciousness now, and that causes a lot of internal turmoil for me, because I can't prove that it exists, but yet I've had experiences that are completely undeniable, and there is science out there that would support plant consciousness. But that kind of brings me to a question that kind of spokes off of that, is this idea or this thought that spirit is transferred within a plant. So if you take a plant medicine, and it's, let's say it's ayahuasca, and it's made from chacruna and the capi vine, that you're actually consuming the plant, and that spirit is speaking to you and speaking through you. What does that mean for something like pharmalosta, where you're taking in monoamine oxidase inhibitor and some form of DMT? Is there spirit in that? If the experience is the same or it's similar to the person taking it, then where does spirit come in?
Yeah. It's interesting because, even when it comes to the clinical trials done from Johns Hopkins to Imperial College of London, they take cGMP psilocybin, right? They're not taking the mushrooms, they're getting, manufactured psilocybin, and however, people are still having these extraordinary mystical spiritual experiences. So it's definitely an interesting intersection and point of conversation we find ourselves in. I don't have the answers to. I don't know. Of course I do.
Well, and I mean, I think that another sort of question that comes off of that is, not necessarily about the spirit, but about the sustainability. When we think about sourcing these materials for widespread use, most of these herbal medicines and plant natural products were developed because of local plants, right? Local exposure. It's something that grows wild around you in your environment that you are exposed to. But if, when we're now looking at this, globally interconnected society, we have to really be concerned about that, about, if we decide that, peyote is the best source, peyote buttons, now we're stepping into indigenous peoples. We're starting to alter their ability to connect with their own religion and spirits and things, but for our purposes. And so, I think that there has to be the spread. There has to be the availability to say, I choose to utilize natural sources, or I choose to utilize a mix, or I choose to utilize, the synthetic versions for whatever reasons, right? We all are going to come to this from a different place. Everyone's going to have their own background, their own biases, their own beliefs. And so it's important to accept those, and to not only like study the pure compounds and what they do at the receptor level and the cellular level, but to think big picture, to think about how can we help all people have access to the medicines and the the services that they need. Because I think one of the coolest things about the way that Ashley does it and talks about it is that it really is that personal connection. This is not a you walk in, you're grabbing it off the shelf because somebody told you it's going to work, right? She's utilizing her knowledge to look at you, understand you, and say, I think this is going to work for you, but it's not a one-time thing, right? Like, she's going to then say, okay, how did that feel? How did that work? Did that help? Are there random side effects? Are there other little things? And then she's going to sort of adjust those dosages. And so, I think that we have to make sure we utilize the whole spectrum.
Yeah, and it's a really good point about sustainability, because that is a problem. I mean, there's a lot of plants. The United Plant Savers is a wonderful organization who protects, I mean, their whole service is protecting native plants that are endangered. And so, the same thing could go for these entheogens. And it's interesting though, the point that, is it the spirit of the plant, or is it, how does the synthetic do a similar thing? And, I've had experiences with synthetic things and natural things. And in my own body, there is a difference, even though they are similar. In my physical body, I have found that the natural based ones are a little more gentle. But, again, that's just in my body. The neat thing, though, is kind of going back to the point I was talking about earlier, and Dr. Tidgwell's point is that we have to think about widespread use. And again, not to say one is better than the other, because then that's going to put pressure on the environment, and on plant producers. But, again, if we think about the idea that people are natural too, like we are just as natural as the trees, as the bird in the window, we're natural, but we just have a different level of consciousness. So we've created something based on what exists in nature. So we've studied what happens in nature, and we've created our own replica of it. And so in that way, it's still natural, right? It's not like it's synthetic, but again, if we think about the source of it, it's like we're playing with God's building blocks. Like, God's like, here's all these building blocks. Here's like some models called plants, and you can play with the building blocks, or you can play with the plants, and so we can kind of just, I think both of them have value.
I think that's the key.
Yeah, I think we get into.
Oh yeah, please.
No, I was going to say, I think that then we start to get into a conversation just about ethics as well. I'll say it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. White people shouldn't do peyote. Peyote is a species that is in danger. You have Native Americans that have been working with this plant for thousands of years, and they're having problems with access now. And when I meet a gringo shaman who's passing around peyote buttons, instantly that just doesn't seem like the right thing to do when there are much more readily available options, such as San Pedro cactus. If you really want to connect with a plant, you can also get mescaline synthesized. Like, there are options out there, and I think it is ethically incorrect to want to seek out plants that may be endangered if they have a tie to a traditional community that has been working and that has a relationship with that plant.
Yeah, I think that's a great, point to bounce off of when it comes to the concept of sacred reciprocity. How do we, as individuals, as organizations, clinicians, researchers, how do we, in our practices, especially surrounding these, sacred medicines, these entheogenic compounds, how do we promote the idea of sacred reciprocity, to where these communities, we can express appreciation, gratitude, but also we can benefit them and respect these practices. So I mean, I'll ask, Ashley and Dr. Tidgewell, what your guys' thoughts are in terms of how we can promote that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, I mean, just from like a practical perspective, my clients and students, they mostly use dried whole plant matter. And so what I have them do is after they finish the plant matter, they give it back to the earth. I tell them they're not allowed to throw it in the trash can. Like, that's disrespectful to the plant. And it's like put it in your house plants, or put it around a tree, but give it back to the earth. And there's something in that I think is really important, and really, being grateful for these is not just, like you said, it's not like I'm just taking the medicine and then I'm done with it when I get what I want. And then in terms of larger communities, I think we can support small scale herb growers too, that are family based, who grow wonderful, high quality medicinal herbs and do it ethically. And by supporting them, we're also, I think, doing a service to the earth, which, can lessen the burden for her and these really large scale operations, and also shipping. I mean, there's a company, I won't say its name, but it's kind of the most well-known source for herbs, and it's wonderful. They have organic products, but when I get packages, I'll see roses from Bulgaria, lavender from here, right? When I know a farmer in North Carolina who grows roses and has wonderful supply, they're actually even better quality because they don't have to go overseas. So I think that's, we can support local farmers, and I think that is also, that can be a way that we reciprocate back to the earth.
Thank you. Dr. Tidgewell, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's a big part of it is listening and learning and humbling yourself, right? That you're gonna walk in and you can learn from other people, and to center others rather than to center yourself, right? Rather than saying, oh, I'm a doctor, right? I have letters after my name, so I know what's going on, right? Like, no, like, I'm going to walk in and say, okay, tell me what you do. How do you use it? What's the actual preparation? What's going on? Because, we have to accept that we don't know everything, that these are incredibly complex systems. When we think about plants, most of us view a plant as, this green thing that has leaves, roots under the ground, maybe some flowers, maybe something tasty to eat, right? But in actuality, there's endophytic fungi that are growing in and around those cells that are producing compounds that are making the plant produce other compounds to react back. There's bacteria growing on and inside of it. They're making compounds that are signaling back and forth. And so there's this whole complex microenvironment that plant is living and experiencing, which is going to affect the compounds that it makes. Like Ashley had said before about the quality of the plant material, right? That all of those things coming together are going to change the chemistry present, and that is going to change the experience and the pharmacological efficacy in the patient. And so we have to, be willing to say that, that I don't know, and be willing to humble ourselves and say, okay, I want to, you live here, you've been working with these things far longer than I have. Tell me what you know. And then sort of give them that ability of, well, these are the things that I have, and these are the things that I can utilize, and this is how I would think to explore it. Does that make sense for you? Would that benefit you? We could think of, I think, one of the big topics right now is cannabis cultivation. We've created these strains which are so far from natural cannabis. They're producing so much THC that it's just like, all right, this is ludicrous. Like, this is no longer the native normal plant. This is now a chemist. Right? We've turned this plant from being just a plant into a chemist to produce this compound that we want. Right. And so, like Ashley was saying, that, you can kind of get these different strains and get the different effects you want. And so that's, I think, really the benefit, that we can then work with these, indigenous and native healers and local populations to say, yeah, like, what would you like? Now let's try to sort of develop that and use these, cross-pollination or genetic techniques or whatever we have access to really develop and design things and then test them, and say, okay, that worked, or, oh, we thought we knew what we were doing, but we totally screwed up, right? We thought we were, enhancing the aspects, the positive aspects, but we enhanced the negative. And learning by observation and trial and error and scientific method and all those things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm understanding, just implementing as many sustainable practices as possible, right? If you're looking to source, being as hyper localized as possible to support, local farmers, and be able to gain, high quality products. And then additionally, when it comes down to conversation and dialogue, separating yourself from the conversation, diminishing your ego by yourself to learn and accept, but also to challenge and have thoughtful conversations to see how we can synergize with natives, with other indigenous communities, our local farmers or local people. So yeah, I think that was very well said, guys. I appreciate that. We're gonna get into questions here shortly with the attendees, but before we do that, I think that it's safe to say that with where we're at, right, when it comes to the psychedelic space, when it comes to our understanding in natural products chemistry, to herbalism, like there's so much we understand, but there's still so much we need to know. And when it comes to public policy and legislative efforts surrounding drug reform and psychedelic, entheogenic reform, I think that it's really important that we raise a voice to look into the concepts and decriminalize. I think that is going to be at the utmost importance to just decriminalize these compounds. So that way we can increase access to research, we can increase access to native healers, to indigenous communities. These are mushrooms, these are plants, these are naturally occurring alkaloids. They deserve to be, liberated. And then because the thing is that the eventual pharmaceuticalization of these compounds is inevitable. It's going to happen, right? There's a lot of money to be made, and people need to see that. And that's not a bad thing, but what's bad is if the only option is CGMP psilocybin, right? We need to have as many options as possible. And I think that today's conversation did a good job in reflecting the reasons why we need all options. So thank you guys so much for hopping on and sharing your knowledge. It was great. Really appreciate it.
And can I just sort of toss in there also like destigmatization? There's such a stigma against natural products, against the word natural products, right? Against the word herbal medicine, that, when you say herbal medicine, people are like, oh, okay, hippie, but like when you think about the drugs that are coming out of the pharmacy, so many of them were developed based on natural products, based on herbal medicine, that if you throw away herbal medicine, you might as well throw away half the medicines in the pharmacy. And so it's really important to not prejudge because of whatever, your internal connotation is, but instead understand, like you said.
Thanks. Totally.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's become such a loaded term. And when I hear somebody, herbal medicine, the first thing I normally say is, have you ever taken an aspirin? Like, oh yeah, well, guess what? That came from a tree. So that's herbal medicine, or at least at one point it was.
Willow
Thank
bark.
you. That was a really great point.
Cool. Well, all right. People in the audience, feel free to throw some questions in the chat or we have a designated Q&A area at the very bottom of the screen. Feel free to ask some questions. We did have some questions throughout the conversation. One question will be geared toward Ashley, would be how much does race and varied liver enzyme concentrations impact herbal recipes? Is there a guideline for the herbal world?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, there isn't specifically. However, I do think there is something to be said for using plants that are native within your ancestral line. If you're Italian, your body might be better just tuned to receive herbs that are Mediterranean nature and that grew in the natural environment. You might have I'd love studies on this, but you might have more, specific receptors, right? Or more, like there was a study that was done in, on women in Japan, and they show that women in Japan have less alpha estrogen receptors, which make you predisposed to breast cancer, and women in the West have more more estrogen beta receptors. No, I'm switching that. It was the opposite. It was the beta in Japanese women, and it was the alpha in Western women. And the thing that they found that was so interesting is that Japanese women have a very high soy diet, which is high in isoflavones, which are these compounds from plants that tend to bind those alpha beta or those estrogen beta receptors. So it's like, when you eat a lot of a certain amount of certain food for a long period of time, your body just adapts to it. It becomes more receptive to that. So I think, well, I don't know if there's been studies done on it. And in terms of liver enzyme, I'm not 100% sure, but I always, I have my list of questions that I ask every client about liver function, and I can pretty much ascertain what their liver function is just by asking questions and looking at a few markers on their body. So, I'm sure maybe like a naturopath would look at those a little bit more closely, but in my practice, it's a little bit more observational and like question oriented. So I hope that answered it.
Cool. Thank you, Skylar, for the question.
Yes, great question.
Another question that came into the chat was, let's see, to squat. So Una asks this to Scott Jensen's question: when we ingest a plant, does a plant spirit become a part of us? Any thoughts there? I know we spoke about it a little bit, but yeah, if we want to add more to that topic, that was an exciting topic.
I'll add something to that. My husband has done a lot of work with ayahuasca and wrote a book on it many years ago. And he was telling me when he was in the jungles of Peru that the shamans and medicine people, and you may have had this experience too, Scott, that they specifically when you do, they call it a plant dieta. So when you drink a certain plant for a certain amount of time, that plant becomes a part of you, and that you don't even need the plant to be able to recall its spirit. So once the plant has like become a part of your body, you can just say the plant's name or sing its Icaro, and its medicine will come back up, which is like pretty incredible. And I know in my own body, I've been in circumstances where I've needed a certain herb and I haven't had access to it. And I'll just pray to that plant and say, Yarrow, could you help me out? And I'll think about Yarrow and I'll do like a meditation on the plant. And I'll often see some effects, maybe not as many or as much, but I can feel that spirit interacting with me. But I'm curious to hear if you guys have anything to add to that.
So this is something that I have a lot of discussions about this. I tend to work more on like the integration side, and I work with a lot of people that have a lot of different belief systems about what's actually happening when you consume an entheogen. And some people believe that you're taking a molecule that is released as a chemical communicator from the plant. Some people believe that there is like a physical spirit imbued within the plant that comes from source. And some people believe that you're just taking a chemical that's altering your brain chemistry, and so you're seeing things different. And, there are so many different thoughts about it. And me being, somewhat anti-woo, but also having had experiences where I've, sat in a maloka in the middle of the jungle, like talking to plants all night. I don't necessarily know the answer, but I think that ultimately, regardless of what it actually is, because we can't really determine what it is, it's important. So whether that spirit is you're actually speaking with spirit, or if that spirit is just a byproduct of your body's adjustment to ingesting that thing that is attaching onto your receptor, that it is spirit nonetheless, right? I think it just depends on where you think that spirit comes from.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Scott, that you bring up there. It's the word spirit, right? It's sort of the, what does that mean? And everybody's background, everybody's what they bring to the table is going to define spirit differently. And so whether that is a true, sort of soul, spirit, consciousness, or whether that is simply a recognition of the power within that plant, and that opens up your beliefs to be more empathetic and to want to protect that plant because of its power. I think that's an individual sort of belief system, but that, whatever it is, the end result is the same, right? It makes you more connected. It makes you more empathetic. It makes you more concerned for those around you, human, animal, plant, and other. And so I think that, there's a benefit, whether you call it a spirit or not. I think that's really a, kind of an important point.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, just because we don't know, and I think it's sort of part of the fun thing about it is that with your own individual background, experience, what you've read, what you've digested, like it's your own personal truth. I mean, we're so limited by language to try to describe the experience and that phenomena that, I mean, we're just limited in terms of being able to, like, what is a soul? What is consciousness? What is, spirit? Like it's just, it's a very fascinating point of conversation. It's an exciting one. Maybe we should have an event solely on this.
So there's like one thing that I read recently in The Entangled Life. So like we know that there's these fungi which can infect ants, and it goes up. Yeah, there you go. And it makes the ants climb to the highest plant and bite on, and then they die, and the fungi sprouts out of its head so it can spread its spores farther. And it's like, okay, that's crazy, right? That this fungi infects and then totally changes the behavior of this ant. And so if you then extrapolate that to humans and say, all right, humans eat mushrooms, which are fungi, they have this experience, and it changes the way that they act so that they now cultivate these mushrooms more, and the mushrooms live more. And it's like, is that what's going on? Is this, fungal consciousness? That that if you ingest, or ayahuasca consciousness, that because you've ingested it, it is now making you help its life cycle. And so that's it's sort of starts to get on a really crazy tangent, but it's an interesting kind of thought experiment to go down.
Totally.
Yeah, it reminds me of the book.
We're just trained monkeys.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you've read the book, The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. It's a really good one. And he takes 4 plants and he talks about how those plants have manipulated humans over time to cultivate them more. And cannabis is one of them. It's cannabis, potatoes, tulips, and apples. It's fascinating, but it's a similar kind of, similar idea.
Cool. Well, we do have a couple more questions here before we wrap it up tonight. Dr. Kevin Lanzo asks, or states, and then asks, both panelists touched on the power of the placebo effect and the mind on plant medicine healing. Do you have any reflections on how to bring this science into modern clinical trials when seeking FDA approval for a plant extract?
I think that for the most part, the FDA is trying to remove that, right? So that's why we do double-blind, triple-blind studies, to try to remove as much as possible the human element, so that we understand, okay, this plant extract or this compound, this is what it's doing outside of the space of mental, kind of emotional work. This is what it's doing pharmacologically, physiologically, at the receptors, outside of any other element. But we also know that there is a huge kind of emotional context to a number of the diseases and issues we deal with. Pain being one of those kind of things, right? We know that there's a physical aspect of pain, but there's an emotional aspect of pain, right? Stubbing your toe on a good day versus stubbing your toe on a bad day, it's a different feeling. And so we have to not only deal with the receptor itself, but we have to deal with the cognitive impacts. And so, I think that the FDA isn't, deal, right? Their focus is much more on receptor target, this binds, this is the effect. Is that a good effect or a bad effect? What's going to happen? But then it's going to be up to us to develop care systems and treatment systems that encompass and incorporate the whole person, and really start to look at all the other things, right? All the social determinants, all of the mental, emotional aspects. And I mean, I think that you could include that in clinical trials, but it's going to become a lot more difficult. And so I think that's probably more of, you know, what Ashley is doing, what we get out of traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and these other sort of more traditional health systems.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the FDA be interested in this. You know, I mean, that would be amazing to have, you know, like an Ayurvedic study where they take Vata, Pitta, and Kapha types and they give them, you know, like that would be so interesting. But yeah, that's really not what they're really into regulation. And yeah, and things that you can replicate. They really want to see trials that you can replicate over, you know, many years and in many different ways. So yeah, I don't see that happening. But you know, the work of, if you're interested in the placebo, I mean, looking at Ted Kapchuk's work, you know, one of the things that he found too was that optimists, you know, like in the surveys they would do before some of these trials, that optimists tend to have better results even with the placebo, and pessimists tend to have, you know, more negative results even with the placebo. So, you know, it's like we know that that's true too. And so, you know, finding practices that help us to see the bright side, like meditation and yoga, being outside in nature, we know is so good for our mental health. You know, the whole forest bathing trend, which is ancient and so common sense, but we have to have a name for it, and then it's valid. But you know, I think there's a lot of things we can do individually, and that hopefully culturally, I think we are starting to move in that direction. You know, I mean, the fact that we're even here talking about this today would not have happened 15, 20 years ago. So, you know, I think we're heading in the right direction, but you know, my push is more for individual responsibility, because I don't think the government's gonna take care of us, guys. I'm sorry. So I think we have to, you know, we can use the system and utilize its strengths, but where it falls short, we have to come up with our own practices and, you know, find our own structures of support.
And like outside of the FDA, we do have studies that are looking into these kinds of things, right? So there's, you know, NCCIH is the National Center for Integrative Health, and so, you know, they are looking at meditation and yoga and, you know, whole plant extracts and really trying to look at mindfulness and these other aspects that maybe we've sort of ignored a little bit, and to try to help bring those into our system a little bit more and incorporate it.
Yeah, and I think we're a little bit further along than you might think. I'm interning at the VA during clinical rotations, and we have like a polytrauma clinic there where we work with a lot of folks that have traumatic brain injuries and, you know, all sorts of mental health issues. And yoga is a big part of a lot of their treatment plans. Mindfulness meditation is a big part of a lot of their treatment plans. You know, there's this program called Peak that they're trying to get veterans to be able to manage their pain better without using prescription medications, and mindfulness meditation is a huge part of that program. So when, you know, I see things like that are happening within the system, that gives me great hope for, you know, a much broader appeal for a lot of these modalities.
Yeah, I mean, even for my last year, or my second to last year at pharmacy school, they implemented a mindfulness class, right? And this is through a pharmacy school program. So, I mean, Dr. Tidwell probably understands, like, that's crazy. I mean, that's awesome that they're implementing that. So yeah, it's nice to see that these other modalities are being recognized and being legitimized and being implemented, because it's honestly about damn time. Cool. Another question we have here, Dr. Kevin Lanzo, is regarding synergistic effects in whole plant extracts. Can anyone give some examples of positive or negative allosteric modulators in psychoactive plants?
Yeah, so I mean, I bring up positive and negative allosteric modulators because we know that they exist. No, there's not really, at least not that I'm aware of, very many good studies, especially because of legal status, on whether they exist within sort of, psychedelic plants, entheogenic plants. There's a lot of work being done right now on cannabis, obviously, that, we see sort of the differences in the way that, we're marketing sort of a broad spectrum extract or a broad spectrum tincture versus sort of a pure THC or CBD. And so we can sort of start to see some of those effects. But I can't off the top of my head sort of give you anything that's that I know of that's a negative or a positive allosteric modulator. But we sort of know that they exist. And we also know that especially terpenes, which are, kind of in all plants and really kind of omnipresent in these extracts, that they a lot of times are, they're not selective. They sort of mildly activate a lot of different receptors and a lot of different systems. And so they're sort of generally going to be kind of turning your systems up and down, and that's going to have an impact, right? As it's trying to find that balance or to bring us back into some other place. But I think it'd be an awesome study. Like that would be so cool to, or even take a known positive allosteric modulator or a known negative allosteric modulator and co-administer and say, okay, what is this going to do? What would this do if I have the synthetic? What would this do if I have the natural extract? And to try to tease out some of those things of entourage effects and, just other activities.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah, there's actually a research lab in Florida that is doing, they call it chromatographic extraction, where they'll take extracts, and oftentimes plants or bacteria or extracts will have one major compound. And, in the past, we would say, okay, we're going to focus on the one major compound. But now what they're doing is they're removing that compound from the extract and then testing the extract and saying, okay, what are all those little minor things doing? What are all those things that we haven't paid attention to yet doing? And do they have an effect without the major compound present? And what's going on? And is there something that we're missing? Because the volume is turned up so much on that one compound, are we missing the effects that are underneath? So it's chromatographic subtraction.
Maybe you can type it into the chat. That might help.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We have a couple more questions as well. These are regarding some of Dr. Tidgwell's studies in Cameroon. The first being, can you elaborate on some of the trends you witnessed between the natural plant extracted and the current synthetic marketed drugs used for a specific disease? It's from Anne Claire.
Hi, Anne. How you doing? Anne Claire? So I definitely know Anne Claire. So with the stuff coming out of Cameroon, so we're mainly looking at it for pain and inflammation. And so far we're seeing a lot of, kind of known standard flavonoids, compounds we kind of expected. And we're hoping to find something new. We haven't yet, but we're sort of still looking at it. And the other thing that we're doing is trying to look and see if maybe there's some minor compounds that are going to activate G protein coupled receptors, as opposed to just being sort of general anti-inflammatory agents, kind of messing with the prostaglandin synthesis or inhibiting COX or lipoxygenase enzymes. But we haven't really seen that much coming out of it. So it seems like most of the things we've looked at so far are probably, generally anti-inflammatory. But you never know. You have to look to see what's there.
Cool, thanks. And last question here being for your studies, you noted that it was less addictive. Were there other adverse effects such as drowsiness or anything else related to opioids that were also lessened?
Okay, so I want to make it clear that the compound, which was an analgesic, was a semi-synthetic version. So it was not coming directly from the plant. So this was a semi-synthetic analog, which had changed which receptor it was hitting. So it went from hitting the kappa opioid receptor, which tends to be dysphoric, has some interaction with serotonin, which is what was causing the hallucinations, over to the mu opioid receptor, which is predominantly the receptor that we think of as, activating analgesia. We did look into whether it altered sort of gut motility and a lot of those kind of deleterious effects. It's been a while since I worked on Herkenhorn and that kind of stuff, and we didn't do a lot of long-term dosing, so I don't think we didn't see respiratory depression, and we didn't see. I don't think there was an impact on fecal motility, but I don't know for sure.
Well, appreciate that. So yeah, it's about that time to wrap up. For our panelists, any last words you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure, I'll say a few things. I mean, this has been I've learned so much from this discussion, so I'm just so grateful to the panelists, to the good questions that came through. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, like Dr. Tidgwell said, like there's a lot we don't know, and it's a good thing. It's actually a very good thing to be open. And for people that are interested in learning more about plants, don't be afraid. There are a lot of really, like my favorite 2 plants, I call them my gateway plants because they're really safe, but they often get you hooked into all the good herbal stuff, is nettles and oat straw. And they're nutritive tonics. They're good for the nervous system. They're just, incredible food-like plants that can really change people's lives. So, I think, yeah, like don't be, I think, overwhelmed if you're new to herbs, because, again, it's the people's medicine. I mean, this is the medicine that should be free and should be accessible to everyone. So if you're curious about it, there's probably a local herbalist in your town who'd be happy to take you on an herb walk, maybe with a mask for now, but but just seek that out for yourself and you'll be amazed at how accessible and easy it is to connect with the plant world.
And you said nettle and oat straw, is that right?
Oat straw, yeah.
Thank you.
And I have a YouTube channel, and I actually have two video blogs on those herbs. So if people are interested, they can go to Sky House Herbs on my YouTube, and I have about a half an hour talk on each of them and how to brew them and how to make it for yourself. But those are really simple, easy plants to use.
Awesome. And then also, Ashley, while we're on the subject, is there anything that we can do, whether it be through PsiloHealth or our following? Is there anything that we can do to support the work that you're doing that's so important?
Oh, I mean, if you like what I said, like if it resonates with you, it's always nice to have new followers. So I do have a YouTube channel that I mentioned, Sky House Herbs. I'm on Instagram at Sky House Herbs. I'm on Facebook as my name. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, I know not everyone wants to dive into a full year of study. And then I would also say, support your local herbalists. I think that's so important, and your local herb farmers, and check out the work of United Plant Savers and their conservation work in protecting our native endangered plants.
Thank you. Dr. Tidgwell, any last remarks, and then what can we do to support what you have going on?
In the immortal words of Frank Zappa, the mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. So, what I would say is ask questions, educate yourself. If you're afraid to, sound silly, don't. Just go out there, learn about the world around you, ask the questions that you have. If you think something might be dangerous, find somebody that knows a little bit more than you and, get clarification before you try anything. If you're going to go on an herb walk, I would, say start small. Generally, a little bit of a taste of a leaf is probably not going to hurt you, but be real careful if you're going into that fungal area. And, ask questions, be open, and explore the world. It's a pretty amazing place.
Truly. Thank you guys so much. yeah, as Ashley said, please get connected with her, follow her on her journey, learn from her. Be open-minded, love that. And with PsiloHealth, yeah, continue, following us. We hope to host these every Thursday, third Thursday of every month. We host an integration series event. Next month, we'll be bringing in a breathwork specialist. And the goal is to find a pulmonologist or a respiratory therapist to talk about some things. We're still searching for one. So if you guys have any insight, still one that would be interested in this type of event, feel free to forward them our way. Otherwise, yeah, stay tuned for some interesting developments with our PsiloHealth offerings. And with that, Scott, is there anything else on your mind you want to share?
Just two things real quick. Number one, I want to thank our panelists because, this type of conversation is exactly, what we wanted when we started concepting this, is bringing together, people that, could be seen as diametrically opposed and helping them to find like common ground if they don't find it themselves, but they always seem to do that somehow. So that's amazing. And I just want to personally thank you because I feel like I've really grown from this experience, and I've learned a lot, and I have a newfound an updated respect for herbal medicine, and I'm also like much more confused by chemistry. So that is definitely points of more growth for me. But no, I really did learn a lot, and I do feel like I view the world slightly differently after this. So I think that's a positive. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
We'll stay connected then. So have a good one. Peace out.
Thanks, everybody.